Hello, everyone. It's wonderful to see everyone arriving on our screens.
That's true.
Well, it's 4 o'clock, so I think we'll get started and anticipate that people will continue to join us over the next couple of minutes. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to this first in our series of Encore Webinars. These webinars are sponsored by the Schlegel UW Research Institute for Aging and Conrad Grebel University College here in Waterloo, Ontario, Canada, and also the Centre for Aging and Pastoral Studies in Canberra, Australia. And they have their origins in the 10th International Conference on Aging and Spirituality that was held 6 months ago here in Waterloo. After the conference, we heard the desire to repeat some of the presentations so that more people could benefit and join in on our conversation. So this is our attempt to share the conference further. And we're so glad that you could join us. Today we have Chris Pomfret here with us from New Orleans in the USA, bringing us his workshop entitled Spirituality in Our Third 30, Possibly Our Best Asset as We Age. Chris is a board member of the Presbyterian Older Adults Ministries Network. He founded the Third 30 in 2014 to address the challenges of aging. And I learned yesterday from Chris that he just celebrated a birthday this week. And quick calculation tells me that when you started this almost 10 years ago now, Chris, you would have been just on the cusp of your own third 30. And now you're 10 years into it. So I'm sure you've learned lots. Chris has built a curriculum that encourages people to think differently about aging, especially as the boomer generation enters their senior years, and to embrace the challenges instead of fearing them. His talks and workshops across the world have enabled churches and other organizations to initiate their own Third 30 discussion groups that not only help aging become an intergenerational topic, but also promote awareness of aging in a positive and realistic manner. Originally from the UK, Chris has lived in the USA for the past 31 years. Chris completed a certification course on older adult ministry through Columbia Theological Seminary in 2018, but he's very humble about his interest in spirituality and aging. He told me yesterday when we were chatting that while he likes hanging out with those of us who have been academics and practitioners in this field for years, he actually spent his career as an aerospace engineer. So, Chris is living proof that the topic of spirituality and aging applies to all of us, regardless of who we are, what we do, where we are in the world. We're all aging, and we all have the capacity for spirituality. So, welcome, Chris. Thank you for starting off our webinar series today, and I'll soon turn the floor over to you. Just first to just remind everyone to please keep your microphone muted while you're listening, and we'll save time for questions and conversation at the end. So Chris, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jane, and very good day or evening or morning to everybody across the world, wherever you are. It's wonderful we can all be linked by Zoom and talk to each other, whether you've got a little adult beverage going on in the evening somewhere or a cup of coffee like Sally has in Queensland, Australia. I'm going to find the presentation and hit share screen, and hopefully you can all see a few charts that I've got. If you were at Waterloo in June, you might have heard this. If you can remember, we were having 2 or 3 parallel workshops at a time during the schedule, and I know I get frustrated when I can't go to everything. So I'm going to be looking forward to seeing the reruns that will come in the months ahead. So if you didn't see this workshop, I'm glad you're here. And if you did see it, it's going to be slightly different in that we'll do some discussion at the end rather than interaction in the middle. I think today time is too short to do breakouts and discussing groups and then come back and tell us what you discussed. It's going to be better just to I'll let you all pile on with your opinions, which I'm sure you have plenty of at the end, and I will purposely leave plenty of time for that. As Jane said, I got interested in older adult ministry, or just the whole thing of aging, in my mid-late 50s, when I watched my parents age in England. I was living obviously in America, but my brother was the 1 mile away caregiver, and I was the 3,000 mile away, show up once or twice a year and see a stark change in how my parents were aging. And again, being an engineer, we fix things, and I felt there's got to be a better way to age than this. And my parents have been wonderful people, successful, and I'm very proud of them and respect them. But I realized that through a lack of planning and a lack of awareness of really what happens as you age and get into your 80s and so on, we needed to do a better job of it. And it wasn't just them; it was everybody from their generation who were following a similar path of just being surprised by A, living as long as they had, and B, just not being ready for the challenges. And you stop and think, well, we've got God-given challenges all through our lives. In our first 30 years, we've got the whole problem of learning how to socialize with people, how to learn at school, make friends, and fit in, and then go out and get a job. And then in our second 30 of life, we've got the issue of bringing up a family and probably marriage and home and profession. And there's challenges that we just accept. And I think we unwittingly think that in our third 30, from 60 to 90, we're going to retire and we're going to put our feet up on the rocking chair and sit out on the porch like Sally is at the moment, enjoying the weather, and just think, oh, everything's taken care of. Well, there's still challenges, and it's logical to say there will be challenges right the way through our life into the last day we live. And so we have to be ready to deal with them. And that's why I started the Third 30. It was meant to be a discussion group, and it just began by happenstance at our little church in Dayton, Ohio, which is where I was living then. And everybody wanted to pile on and discuss their experiences, not only of their own lives, but of maybe their elderly parents' lives and the issues they were going through. So I realized there had to be something needed to be done. This was going to scratch an itch that a lot of people had. So I've done several different presentations as this whole concept has grown, but I got intrigued by the word spirituality, as I'm sure you all are. And I first came across the Aging and Spirituality conference at Concordia University in Chicago in 2017. The Presbyterian Older Adult Ministries Network met in conjunction with that conference, and it was very enlightening to hear what a lot of people said across the different religions. And it made me realize, this may be not a profound statement to you, but I had that aha moment one day that, every human being in this world, no matter where you live and what creed, religion, whatever you are, we're all united by the challenges of aging. We're, as a human being species, we're all going to suffer or experience the same things. Now, we might deal with them different. If certain religions might have different outlooks on how you deal with certain parts of aging. Native Americans talk about you walk off into the wilderness and die under a tree. That's which is a very old-fashioned and traditional way of doing things, and there's nothing wrong with that. But other parts of the world will keep you alive as long as possible, no matter what. There's a whole spectrum. But the problem, the common thing is that we're all related by the challenges of aging. And I think, A, it's powerful, and B, it's a motivation for us all to unite, as you all do in this conference across the world, to bring our common challenges together and discuss how to deal with them. So the word spirituality became a fascination for me several years ago after the Concordia conference. And it obviously is to all you too, because it is a word that is kind of mysterious and tough to define, as I'll show you in the next chart. So we're going to talk about what spirituality is. And, this is not a PhD level discussion. This is just me a mere mortal from the street thinking about it and wrestling with the whole concepts of it. What is spirituality to us? You're going to be able to talk at the end and say what you think it is after I've told you what I think it is. Sometimes people have to find their spirituality. They don't realize they've got it. How we use it, because as I say, it's probably our best asset or best weapon we can use to fight off the challenges of aging as in our third 30. And all this can be discussed on the Zoom. So really quickly, I'm going to give you the fast 2-minute thing about the third 30. And I've touched some of it already. In early life, we start off pretty helpless in a crib, and we wear diapers and we're spoon-fed. We can do nothing for ourselves. Then we start to be able to walk unaided. We get petulant, the terrible twos, as we call it in Britain and probably other countries of the world too. Before you know it, you're getting through school and got a diploma. You're developing at a huge fast pace. I call it like being in the torrent of a river that's in flood stage. It's flowing with such vigor and energy, and you're just going with the flow and almost without realizing it. Then we get to the point of our second 30 where we go get a job and we get married and have some children. And I would contend that our mental and physical capability begins to flatten out. We've done all the developing by and large. Now we start to utilize what we've learned and what we've developed just through growing up. And that's what we do in our job. We never stop learning, but our capabilities in the mental and physical side have probably matured. So things flatten out somewhat. And this is just a generalistic cartoon depiction. But then, of course, we get to this point where somewhere roughly in our early 60s. And it's like, what's going to happen now? And the air gets sucked out of the room when I draw this, typically, and there's live people there, because first they're shocked by this line that drops back to basically back in diapers, spoon-fed, walking unaided. The reality is that we become, I contend, childlike again. And maybe that's the purpose of life. It's a full circle. That's really how it is if you live this long. And yes, grumpy old men, they made a movie about it. You know, we get petulant and stubborn and obstinate and cantankerous. But there's a lot of similarities, I believe, between the beginning of life and the end of life. But what nobody does is give you a little warning here that they tell you if you're a financial advisor, you can't tell anybody that the past performance is no guarantee of the future. But nobody tells us this in our life here, that, hey, you know, you're 60 and you're retiring, and your body, the mental and physical capability is probably going to start declining at some stage. We don't get told that typically. We have to realize it for ourselves. And the other point is nobody says, like on the top of the ski slopes, warning, dangerous precipice. You know, you're just not aware that we're going to start going downhill at some rate. And it's a different path for everybody, but it's not going to go uphill or stay flat. But we've been used to this 30 years of steady state that we start to forget that, or don't realize that things are going to decline. And so the whole point of my third 30 is to get people to think about what they need to think about. I don't tell them what to do or how to grow old or what. It's just make them think about things in a timely manner so that they will be ahead of the drag curve. They won't be on the defensive and caught out by the challenges of aging. So that's the quick introduction to the third 30. And there's lots of sessions I developed to go through specific topics in detail in church or other groups, discussion groups. But this line here is the beacon of hope. This is, and you'll probably no prizes for guessing that this is what I contend to be spiritual growth, and that maybe as we age, we realize we've got some spirituality within us, or it's grown within us through the experience of life and the wisdom, but our outlook and perspective and philosophies leads to hopefully us being more spiritual. And I'm going to show you why I think this is a powerful asset in our later years. I don't believe that 10 or 15-year-olds need to be highly spiritual, whether they realize it or not. I mean, some people will contend spirituality is in us in abundance from the moment we're born. I won't argue with that. I don't know enough to argue about it, but I just feel that the growth is perhaps more apparent in us as we age. So lots of kind of abstract and beautiful, motivating pictures that can be used for spirituality. But if you go to the Webster Dictionary, as I did a year or so ago, there's 14 different definitions, and I'm not going to go through them in detail here. You can read them yourselves later. But they're kind of what I call circular definitions, and because they just keep coming back to the word spirit or spiritual, as you can see here. Spiritual, relating to or consisting of spirit. Well, it's not really helped me very much. So we'll cut to the chase and say that there's some better definitions of spirituality in these references, which you can look up yourselves. But they attack what it might mean, and these are more meaningful definitions, I would suggest, to the ordinary man on the street that wants to try and understand what this is about. So maybe it's an unbreakable relationship between the heart and mind, an internal harmony, feng shui, or karma, or all these other words that can be used. It's reported that 25% of Americans or more are spiritual but not religious. And I try to decouple the need to be religious in order to be spiritual, and vice versa. I think there's a lot of people who are spiritual but not religious because they are conscious of how they interact with others. They do live contemplatively, and they do have an appreciation of the natural world, but perhaps they're not deeply religious and church-going. And then there's this Himalayan Institute definition about spirituality, the goal being to heal and empower yourself. So I would ask to later on, you can all put your hands up and chat about what does spirituality mean, to you as individuals. And I'm going to throw a few ideas out as we go along. So in meaningful words, again, if I was asked to talk to somebody about what spirituality means, this is what I might come up with. Being at peace with our age and mortality. I see a lot of people who are fearful of aging, and as my parents were. And it suggested to me at the time that they didn't have a lot of faith in the life they were living. But perhaps it's just spirituality is a better word to encompass being at peace with the fact you're getting nearer to your end of life, the last day of your life, and you're happy with the age you're at, and taking it for what it is, being realistic. Feeling gratitude for life. People say to me, yesterday, happy birthday. Yes, I was 69, and I say, well, I'm grateful for being upright and still breathing. It's when you get to nearly 70, it's wonderful that you've got all you've got, and you realize a lot of people didn't get this far in life. So you feel gratitude that you've enjoyed 69 plus years on this earth. Practicing forgiveness is a big one. We've all had contretemps and arguments with people and friends and even family members through our lives. And you see a lot of hurt and angst through broken relationships. Perhaps our spirituality will help us practice forgiveness and feel good about the forgiveness that we give. Providing effective mentorship. I mean, some people are like born teachers, guiders, advisors, consultants. They just, it's in their DNA to try and be mentors. But we can be mentors to people in ways that we often never realize, and have a powerful and profound effect on especially younger people. So again, it's being conscious of the value you can give back to the young and emerging people in our lives. So I'm suggesting that spirituality can encompass all these things. And then there's leaving a legacy. It's like, how do you want to be remembered? Take the trouble to document perhaps your philosophy on life and what you felt was important, and what had helped you be successful or find the most peace and karma, life lessons, if you like, which, of course, when we die, we take to the grave. But if we can leave them somewhere tangible for others to benefit, I think It's again of profound benefit and value, but we have to be aware of the value of that while we're still live and kicking and can create that legacy to pass on. Of course, people can ignore it or reject it, but at least you've left it there for somebody to consider. Harvesting our lives. There's some of you may have heard of a guy called John Donahoe, and he says harvesting the secret riches of our lives is best achieved when we place profound trust in the act of the beginning. Risk might be our greatest ally in this regard. And to live a truly creative life, we need to cast a critical look at where we are, where we've become stagnant, and where new beginnings might be ripening. There can be no growth if we don't remain open and vulnerable to what is new and different. And again, I see this as perhaps being reflective on your life. What enabled you to do well? What events happened that gave you a break in life? I mean, you look at every actor on the stage or in films, and you know there's 100 times more good actors who didn't get the break, didn't get the lucky chance. Or so what was it in your life that where did you get the fortune for a break to be able to go and do what you did? So it's a very reflective and I think spiritual exercise to go through, and a great philosophy to, again, pass on to others about how you might regard life and see what events you think are taking you the wrong way, but they don't. They take you actually eventually to a good place. And showing appreciation to others, I think, is huge. I think if I asked you all, we got 75 people on here. If I said who doesn't like feeling appreciated, I'm sure nobody's going to say, no, I don't like feeling appreciated. We all like being appreciated, but do we show it enough? Obviously, times we can overdo it, but I think it's difficult to overdo it. It's good for us and good for the recipient if we can show appreciation in simple ways. And a lot of these are statements of the obvious, perhaps, but we have to, again, be mindful of some of these ingredients if we're going to derive the benefit of our spirituality. So I think we tend to measure spirituality. People want to talk in these terms. They say, oh, he's a very spiritual person, but what does that really mean? I mean, do we, I'm just going to close something here. Do we need to measure it in physical terms? Why does it matter that somebody is extremely spiritual or partially spiritual? I think it's more important that we find and feel conscious of our own. Have we been aware of it? Did maybe some people today will go away from this and say, I'm searching for my spirituality. I've never thought about it, but maybe I am, and maybe I need to use some of these traits that we attach to spirituality more than I have, being conscious of it. If we did, when did we become aware of it? And how do we cultivate and optimize it? Can we be too spiritual? I don't think so, but maybe, again, it's a good talking point for us later on. So we examine ourselves and basically say, how spiritual am I in a qualitative way, and think, how can I be more spiritual? Would it benefit me? Would it benefit others? Would it make my life feel better? Because often we're living in that darkness without realizing that we're in that darkness. And I just want to help people discover some light, and this, what I call, is a very valuable asset as we age. So here's some thoughts I've had about how we can use our spirituality in our third 30. And as I mentioned earlier, especially the guys among us, we can get cantankerous and stubborn and grumpy. Our egos as men don't want to suggest we can't do something. And so when somebody offers you help, and I'm beginning to notice this more, if I'm on a transit transport through an airport. You know, the big airports in America, you've got these automatic driverless vehicles. People start to stand up and offer you a seat. And I'm thinking, well, I'm a pretty fit and able person, but they're looking at me and clearly thinking I'm a senior, and they're being gracious and considerate. And whether I need it or not, I will thank them and take the seat, because I want to give to them because they're giving to me. Or somebody asks you, can I carry the box, open the door? A knee-jerk reaction is to say, no, I'm okay, I can do this. But if we stop and think and prepare our minds in advance, we can learn to say, well, that's very kind, thank you very much. So accepting help is actually giving to the people who are trying to give to you. And does it matter that whether you need the help or not? The beautiful thing in the world is that two human beings who perhaps don't know each other, one's offered help to the other and the other's accepted it, and you both go away feeling good. Practicing grace, so selfless behaviors. It doesn't need to be about us anymore. We can be modest and helpful to others, and we're not looking for credit or praise or recognition necessarily. We just passing it on because people passed it to us earlier in our life. And connected, I think, with that is showing humility and modesty. We don't have to. I have a think about intergenerational relationships, and this is something that I'm dealing a lot with within our church. I want 8 and 9-year-olds to feel comfortable talking to 68 and 69 or 79-year-olds. And we, as the older people, can lead the way here and set the example by not talking about ourselves, but showing interest and curiosity in the younger person. We don't have to talk about what we did or say that back in my day we didn't have cell phones and so on. Let's just get on their wavelength and show humility and modesty. Talking about death, again, comfort in the reality that death faces us all, and we're at peace with that. We can write on ethical will, which I would suggest is what are the important values in life? What do you believe are the best ethics that get people through life? And again, there could be statements of the obvious, but the fact you've written them and leave them for others to read, either while you're alive or after you've passed away, could be of great value. Again, write a philosophical life story and life review, where what has got you through life, what were pivotal moments, only when you look back and realize that they were a pivotal moment you didn't know at the time. So I think there's whole philosophical life perspectives that can be written. And we probably won't have family members, your children or grandchildren, saying, hey, why don't you write your life story? You write it all down and do it. But once you're no longer around, they'll wish they had it. So we're being preemptive by writing it. And if they don't want to read it, what's been lost? It's been a lovely exercise to reflect on your life and bolster your own spirituality by thinking about what was important to you. And it will help you, I think, with the rest of our lives as to how we live it and how we use our spirituality. We all know the golden rule, just being civil to people. I think as we get older, it becomes something more important to us, and we're more conscious of being and exercising that civility. Helping others invisibly. You can see people who are struggling in some way, whether it's financially or emotionally. How can you help them and maybe just do it invisibly or anonymously? I mean, you get these, whether it's somebody paying for your coffee order in the drive-through, and when you get to pay, they say, the person in front just paid for you, because you just felt like doing it. It was a good thing. Or you see somebody who needs help and you find a way to do it and move on. Exercising mindfulness. I think this really encompasses a lot of spirituality within us. It's just being present and aware of the situation we're in every day. It can happen going for a walk and listening to the birds sing, or watching the flowers of the trees, or the boats on the river, or children playing in the playground. Just taking in the world and the life we're in, and being aware of that present and situation. And then the big one, I feel, is minimizing denial and maximizing realism. We've all got denial in us to some degree. I kind of joke a little bit and say some people have got a teaspoonful of denial and some have got a bucketful, but because we see people who live in denial. In fact, you can call it double denial when they don't even realize they're in denial. They're in denial about being in denial. And then there's others who are totally, maybe only have a teaspoon of denial in their whole body, and are fully accepting of what's to come, and extremely philosophical about it. So I think we have to decide, where would we like to be on that scale? Do we want to have literally no denial, or are we going to ignore it and just continue to live and not care about what's going to happen until it happens, and then live with the consequences? I'm kind of a compulsive planner. I'd much rather prepare and be ready for things that are going to happen than suddenly being blindsided by events that will come along in our third 30 and be shocked, or no, well, I never saw this coming. And there's other examples that, as I say, you can add and we can talk about in the discussion. So we're only at 35 minutes here, so we're going to have plenty of time for you all to weigh in, and I'd love to hear your perspectives. This is where you can give to me and help me learn and become more wide perspective on this fascinating topic. But I do think it's an extremely valuable attribute as we age. You can, whether we want to try and put a pecking order of other attributes, whether it's our mental or physical health or other things, but in terms of the intangibles, I think spirituality is the foundation of how we're going to feel as we age and how we're going to conduct our lives. You can find a lot of complex and fluffy definitions, and certainly the academics among you may be able to give me much better clarity on what this mysterious word means. But for the person in the street, I think simple words work well and help them understand how they might be spiritual or use spirituality to their best advantage. But I believe it's not delivered to your door like an Amazon package. We do have to search within ourselves for it, and then obviously find it and practice it. And from practicing it, we'll kind of think about what areas are missing, or what areas need to be bolstered, and we'll repeat over and over and build on our known and conscious spirituality that we found. So then you try and think, well, spirituality in one word. It's always a difficult thing to do, but for me, the word would be mindfulness. I like to think that if you're mindful of everything going on around you, as we talked about, being present in the world every day and conscious of what's happening and your relationships with others and how people are noticing how they're hurting or needing help, all those things, it's basically being mindfulness. And I personally think it's a wonderful word, mindfulness. I like it a lot. Now, there's some Bible verses that I think, again, you can read through these at your leisure. But I believe some of these say, we know what's good and proper in life. Let's be mindful of these things and do them. This Psalm 1 is, have the courage to be yourself. Because blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the wicked, but his delights in the Lord. So it's like you go do what you think's right, and you've got the courage to do what's right. be conscious of and embrace the mystery of life. That's what I pull out of this Corinthians Bible verse. And then this rather long one at the end. To me, this says we've all been given talents. Let's be conscious of them and find the power within ourselves to exercise them to the good of the world. So that's how I interpret that other Corinthians chapter. And as always, there's some good reading. These are books that I've read along the way. As I say, it's a fascinating topic. I don't think you can read enough about spirituality, and everybody has a different bent and impact as to broaden your own and deepen your own understanding and appreciation of it. So those are in the charts if you want to look at them later. So yeah, with nearly 20 minutes left before we need to wrap up, I was going to throw it back open to you all. And here's two questions. One is, we can take them in order, or we can just popcorn random it. What does spirituality mean to you? And is our spirituality dependent on our faith? And I hope those are provocative questions that you will offer your opinions, because I'm not sure there's a right answer. But I think we've all got some worthy input to give to each other. So I'm going to throw it back to Margaret and Jane, and we can have hands up discussion.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Chris. So turning it over to everyone else now. What do you have to say? We've heard Chris's questions. Feel free to offer responses or anything that resonated for you in this presentation. What would you like to add or ask? You'll see down in the bottom of the screen on your right-hand side, if yours is the same as mine, there's more with 3 dots. That's the place where you can click on, and that gives you an opportunity to enter something in the chat or to raise your hand. And I already see 2 people with their hands raised. So we'll start with Georgina and then Alan, please.
Thank you very much, Jane. I've truly appreciated this talk. In Australia, we have actually designed a course on spirituality for nurses, spiritual care in nursing, and it's endorsed by the Australian College of Nurses. And I really appreciated that at the end, we did not have the definition of, does spirituality depend on your religion? Because in Australia, we actually have a list of 122 different religions, truly. And it's about faith. It's about how you live your life, what is meaningful for you. And our course is for all nurses. We reach out, we're from Nurses Christian Fellowship, but we reach out to all nurses of all backgrounds. And we have a multi-ethnic, multi-faith nursing community that I've worked in for many years. And what they appreciate is that we acknowledge, listen, and respect their worldviews and create harmony in the workplace, which then creates a healing, therapeutic environment for our patients. And this extended to the final field before my retirement was in the field of disability. And people with disability who can't always express themselves with words or appropriately according to our norms, but they express themselves, can also express their spirituality. And this is extremely important, that we understand that we are all spiritual beings having this earthly experience. And if we can find the time, as was said, thank you to our speaker, it was just wonderful that we have this opportunity to listen. We also have programs now in aged care facilities where I now volunteer. One is called Aged Care Homes for 4-year-olds, and they send in kindergarten groups. And another one, which is more interesting, is aged care facilities for teenagers. And I know our spirituality depends on our life experience and different trajectories for different people, but the awakening that young people have in sitting with and listening to or speaking to people who are elderly is absolutely precious.
Yeah.
So I'm in my third 30s now, and truly appreciating the fact that I have got this far. I'm afraid my younger son didn't. He died when he was 19, and I feel I was a spiritual person at the time, but I only became a Christian 13 years ago in my 30th, the 30th, the third 30th. That's a bit of a tongue twister. So I'll hand over now to the next speaker. Thank you, Jane, and for all the participants here.
Oh, thank you, Georgina. You said so much just now. Thank you. Alan, let's hear from you.
All right, I'll say a bit less. Thanks, Chris. There are a few words that I thought could be added to your list of things that are integral to the spirituality of aging. And I would include the word suffering somewhere. You know, what's your life's experience been of suffering? And I speak as someone who hasn't suffered an enormous amount. I mean, I've had difficult things happen, but I've never been at death's door or anything like that. And I'm conscious that as I age, I wish I'd had that experience going old. And I look at older people and I think, I ask them a lot about their experiences of suffering and how they've got through that. So I'd add that. I just think I would encourage you and people to not to totally secularize spirituality. Your second question, is our spirituality dependent on our faith? A better question for me might be integrated with our faith, or linked to our faith.
Yes.
Good
point.
So I think there's a better way, but I think the older person talking about their faith in a religious context is extremely helpful, and it brings a religion alive, especially for a person who's listening who's not religious. Anyway, and then the last thing, you talk about your legacy and stuff. I find that really interesting. Old people are very concerned about the future, the world that they will be leaving behind, and how they can move the world along. It's not just looking back saying, well, that was great, I've had a good life, goodbye. It's, what's the world going to be like when I'm gone, and am I leaving the world a better place than when I found it?
Good, thank you. Great points. Jane, we also had a question from David Drummond that we may want to address. He said, I wonder what your thesis does for the many among us who lose memory and cognition, i.e. dementia in all its forms, and therefore are unable to engage spirituality, even if they have been highly spiritual in previous 30s. Tough and complex question. I'm not sure I know the answer. I'll take a pot, but I'd love other people to weigh in too. I mean, I might just suggest that the sooner we become aware of our spirituality and practice a spiritual way, then perhaps it will carry forward into our dementia or Alzheimer scenario. We will be perhaps more peaceful people. I was just talking to somebody today whose father-in-law has gone full-blown Alzheimer's in 4 years. He was just talking to me on the phone earlier today, and he wanted me to know because I used to work with him in the Air Force. But he said he's a very peaceful and content guy. He's not aggressive or angry or outbursts yet. I mean, could be, but I feel people's path through dementia and Alzheimer's is like a fingerprint. Everybody walks their own path, and it's different for each person. It's a very individual thing. But here's a person who I believe practiced and was aware of spirituality, and he's so far with full-blown Alzheimer's not being difficult, if I can say it in such candid ways. But
I'd love to answer that one, Chris. Is
Good.
that all right?
Please.
Are
Go
people happy
right
if I
ahead.
step in?
Absolutely. You've obviously, I
Hello,
think you've got
everybody.
enough coffee
those...
now to be awake. Yes.
Oh, for people who don't know me, my name is Sally, and I'm associated with the Centre for Ageing and Pastoral Studies. And so, people who are living with dementia and whose cognition may be affected doesn't actually mean that we can't still engage spiritually. And you think about, if spirituality is about the meaning in your life and what's important to you, everybody can still engage in this. And if you think about spirituality being about, you know, how we relate to each other, and as you put into your slides earlier, you know, appreciation of nature, being together, music, arts, that all of that can remain for people whose cognition has been affected. And it's actually up to all the rest of us to make sure that we provide those opportunities and provide that relationship, and we adjust how we relate. So this great hope, if you are interested in any of this, Elizabeth McKinley has written a great book with Corinne Trevitt of Finding Meaning in the Experience of Dementia and in Spiritual Reminiscence. And it's talking about what's meaningful to you. So I'm going to pop that into the chat before the end of today. But you talked about, I'm going to quickly change the topic, but to say, if someone has dementia or knows somebody who's living with dementia, don't lose hope. Your spirituality is definitely still there. So take heart. So that actually leads to wondering, when you said you wanted one word for spiritual and you had mindfulness. And I would love to put forward, what about spiritfulness?
Yes.
Being full of meaning. So yeah. I'm going to hand over to somebody else who'd like to comment. Joseph.
Hello. Am I getting through?
You are.
Thank you. It took a while to figure out the mute button. Great conversation on many levels, and I'm surprised we've only got 15 minutes, so I don't want to hog it. But I suppose the question I have is, how much can we plan for spirituality if it is gift? And if it is gift from God or some other source that has to come into your life. And my understanding is all great models of spirituality, religious people, political people, humanistic people, had an experience that was personal, that became then universal. Now, if you talk of John of the Cross, who is a mystic within the Catholic Church, he talks about the dark night of the soul. And mindfulness means that you are in a devoid black space. In other words, suffering, in other words, death. And life comes out of death. So I suppose the question is, how much can we prepare for something if it is still to be owned and we're the only ones who can own it before we can share it with anyone else?
Wonderful question.
Well,
Did you want to respond to that, Chris?
I'm going to take a crack, but I want other people to chip in too. I think I kind of straddle this view of spirituality is within all of us to some degree, and I like your idea that certain events will bring it out or trigger it or grow it or make us more aware of it. But it is about being conscious that spirituality to some degree is in us. How do we? I'll say cultivate. I don't think we can manufacture it. It's if we're mindful and present about the world, we can start to think in a spiritual way, and I think it will grow in us, and that happens to a different level and degree depending on individuals. And I like the point you make about the experiences we've had in life, but there may be more to it than that. So are there any other experts on the webinar here who can go further? I think I'm speaking from my own opinion when I say that there are things in life that have made me think the way I am, and I'm not by any means perfect, but I'm conscious I'm not perfect. That might mean I've got some spirituality to recognize that.
Yes, yes,
And you're
the word
constantly trying to do
humility.
better.
The word humility you used earlier, Chris,
Yeah.
as well comes to mind, and that letting go of ego. And we, like you said, we can't manufacture experiences, but live. We live them and we live into them, and we live with vulnerability in relationship with others, so that we share those experiences, and then they may become something that we see as more universal,
Yes.
and that we
Yes.
can communicate with each other about them. Yes.
Right.
I saw a hand just a minute ago. Oh, maybe it's gone.
Can I quickly ask Lisa's question, which was actually a really good one? We'd love to hear from anybody.
Yes.
Earlier on, Lisa, Jean, you said, how can we help congregations or even people that we know see the presence of many older adults as a positive rather than a negative? Feel free to type answers in the chat. Or Chris, how can we see presence of many older adults as positive rather than negative?
And I think I alluded to it a little bit. And again, anybody and everybody weigh in. But I feel we have to set the example first. There's a lot of ageism that goes on both ways. You know, older people are disparaging about younger people, and younger people don't want to talk to older people, the old fogies. I mean, it just is there. It happens. And I think, well, where do we start to break that down? And I want to put our hands up and say the older generations can be an example to the younger and set the tone. And then we might create this positive feeling that Lisa Jean's talking about, and if we just sit and wait for everybody to come around to our way of thinking. So again, it's like my third 30 stuff. I try to challenge conventional wisdom, the traditional way of thinking, and say, let's try a different approach. Let's go the opposite way, and try and be humble, show humility, and set an example, and in the hope that the younger people will pick up on that and impersonate it. Heather might have a comment. I see there's a hand up there.
Yes.
Well, I might have a comment about aging in congregations. We're just addressing that, we're beginning to address that situation now, because we are an obviously aging congregation. So we're going to have to confront that. What I put my hand up about was actually this idea of cultivating spirituality. And the previous speaker talked about, about not having had opportunities potentially to really confront or address spiritual issues. And I think it goes back to Chris, when you talked about denial, not denying our mortality, not denying our aging, without necessarily being ageist about ourselves, but really raising some of the aging questions, the dying questions, the death question with our children, for example, with adult children who may not want to hear that we are thinking about our aging journey or even about dying. And so, and the thing that I see so often now, because my first reading of the Saturday paper involves reading the death notices, is to see, tragically, I think, how many people choose not to have a funeral, which I think denies friends, family, to experience grief, to acknowledge grief, to begin to work through grief from some sort of ritual whatever that might be. It doesn't have to be in a church, for example, or in a religious institution, but some kind of marking this critical life passage. So I think that seizing opportunities to talk about aging and dying and death are really important pieces of grasping and coming to grips with spirituality.
Yes, thank you, Heather.
Okay.
I see two more hands up, Larry and Beate, and I think we have time to hear from each of you briefly before we hit the top of the hour already. So, Larry.
Thank you very much. My apologies for not having a British accent. I hope my comments may be accepted anyway.
Of course.
I'm a thanks, Chris. I'm a life coach. I'm pastor, chaplain for hospice care, chaplain in long-term care, Presbyterian minister, and right now I'm focusing. I reinvented myself to be a life coach, working with people as they move between, and I would say between your second and third 30s, Chris. That part of what happens for us is the challenges between stages are you call them challenges. I think of them like winds and waves. Living here in Hawaii, winds and waves that are difficult to navigate. People don't sail out in the ocean very much here because the winds and waves are incredibly difficult to negotiate and navigate. So as a life coach now, I offer online some assistance in navigating those shoals and those difficulties. Part of that is, of course, a consciousness of spirituality, and I'm so grateful that you are focused on this whole topic, Chris. And I want to say that that I approach spirituality as a praxis, as a practice, and it's really a group practice, not just an individual practice. Sadly, in my opinion, we are caught up in the European approach to everything, which is that you do it as an individual. And if you don't do it as an individual, it's not yours. Well, I believe we are a more Ohana family. We are caught up in the collective experience more so than we are first, before we really become aware of individuality. So there are various practices that come with our religion. And within Christianity, we have the experience of, or the opportunity of, a variety of spiritual practices that don't manufacture the experience, but engage us in being aware of that which is beyond us all. And Chris, I think you even allude to this when you call spirituality mindfulness. Mindfulness is a practice. It's not just oh, now I'm mindful of everything. Oh,
yeah.
But it truly is a cultivated awareness, and that happens in a collective body. That happens in a group. I'm even if I go on my own to find, I'm going to find a guru, but even that begins to shape our community. So yes, I like to think of spirituality in those terms, rather than to think, all right, old person, elder, let's figure out your spirituality now. And
yeah.
we can nurture that in each other, and we move from a consciousness of gross energy to subtle energy to witness to full union with God, if we follow the teaching and the great insight of Evelyn Underhill in her book Mysticism. So thank you very much for mindfulness. I would emphasize that it's a practice that we can nurture and cultivate with everybody, and that it becomes, in this third 30, Chris, such a resource, such an incredible, wonderful resource, as you have brought to the fore, that the practice that we have available to us just enriches that third 30 like nothing. I think probably like nothing, no other thing. I could go on and I won't, because I might become British. So
Well, thank you, Larry. Let's hear from Beate, who does have an accent. You're still muted, Beate.
Yeah, I'm sorry, and I'm conscious of time, but I just want to say to you, Chris, thank you for that practical list. And really what I can see in your list, it's really about the behaviors, not so much about values, but actually express behaviors. And that's really, really important. And there's this universal element to it, which is absolutely critical. And so I really like to really say that's really great. In terms of the mindfulness, I would like to just add that it's really about, when someone said, how do we value the whole aging process? It's about valuing slowing down. It's about valuing actually the inner life, the inner looking rather than the external extroverted life. And it's really about contemplative practice. And so this contemplative practice is universal as well in all cultures, all traditions. And so I would really would love to see that word contemplative word sort of used in terms of, and that whole thing about the present moment, which is the universal element as well. And that sense of, the appreciating, the slowing down. So people aren't just sitting there and staring into nothing, but, they might actually be having some very deep reflections. And, we might think they're lonely because they're just sitting there, but actually they might be very, very content and very happy in their space. And, so because we're judging them from these, active aging eyes, and, unless you're sort of loud and noisy and doing things, you're not happy, So it's about having a whole different view on that. So I love to see that element. And, of course, the whole geo-transcendence and all that goes right into that, of course. And I think we need to blow that up and link that, emphasize that much more in our spiritual work, spiritual care work, that we create that sort of opportunities for people to slow down and to see it valued. I see in aged care facilities, it's all about, let's have another activity. Let's bring the circus in. Let's do this. Let's do that. Let's stimulate. There's no, actually, it's okay to slow down. It's okay just to hold a flower in your hand and spend an hour just you're contemplating on a beautiful flower or whatever it is, and enjoying that wonderful creation. So I just think it's very important. We're talking about frail age. We're not talking about the baby boomers aging. Well, I suppose in the 30s, it's such a huge span. So I think we need to differentiate between the different spiritual practices, but you can't, learn contemplation when you're 90 if you haven't had planted the seeds in the practice. So I think that's what I would like to add in all of that at the end. So thank you. And thank you for your presentation.
Thanks, Beata. Yeah, and I agree with you. As long as it's intentional, doing nothing's a good thing, or just being quiet and peace. I just get a little disappointed when I see people who retired and think they've got nothing else to do, and they're unhappy, and they're really not enjoying the best years of their life, because they've just missed the point, if you like, of what comes after retirement, not only challenges but the joys, and they've lost their way. And some people go back to work because they think there's nothing else to do, and I'm not sure they're being intentional. They've not been able to think in a wider, more philosophical way about what there is in life. Anyway, I know we're past time, so I'm going to let Jane wrap things up.
Well, thank you so much, Chris, and thank you for giving so freely of your time and your thoughts to us today. You've stimulated great conversation, and I'm sure we could talk for another hour, but it is time to go. So just a reminder that you can register for future webinars. We have 5 more in this series, one every month for the next 5 months, and it's at grable.ca/SA. At the same places you registered for this one. And our next meeting will be January 11th with Keith Albans, and we'll be talking about the language and imagery of aging, which we touched a little bit on this afternoon, and we will hear some more about that. So we will be sending out a recording of this, so feel free to share it with your friends. We'll also be sending out Chris's slides, so you'll have those as well. And we may look at the chat as well and see if there are some snippets from the chat that we want to share, because there are lots of great comments there that we didn't have a chance to acknowledge, but thank you to those who contributed to the chat conversation as well. So thank you all for joining us. It's been great spending time with you, and I'll look forward to January. Bless you all.
Bye, everybody.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.
Bye-bye.